Hi, and welcome to Postscript. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and we're happy to have you with us this rainy Saturday afternoon in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, here in the Eastern Panhandle, about 100 miles from Washington and Baltimore. We do this about once every month when we bring speakers here to our little resort town to talk about some particular aspect of the extraordinary kind of change that's happening in this world. The transition to essentially a new world is what it looks like, a new human in a new world. And we have speakers from all over the world that come about once a month. And we'd encourage you and invite you to come and be with us. You can find out more information about that at transitiontalks.org. That's www.transitiontalks.org. And by way of introduction of our guest today, let me talk a little bit about this whole process of trying to understand what's happening in this extraordinary kind of transition to a new world. This is an event that has never happened before in terms of at least the understanding that humans have right now. By that I mean is the rate of change and the kind of change and the quality of the change is unprecedented. So you can't go to the regular kind of experts and you can't go to them and say, so what do you think is going to happen? Because this is nothing like that's happened in the past. And so you've got amazing kind of change happening in kind of conventional kind of terms, in terms of energy and technology and, the implosion of the political systems and geopolitics, and at the same time you've got amazing kind of emergence of a new world and a new human being coming in terms of elevated consciousness and new capabilities and new perspectives. And kind of there are two major kind of trends that are going on at the same time, and from kind of all sources that are available to us that purport to have a perspective or on this from a big point of view, is that this new world that is emerging with these new people with a new set of characteristics are seeing themselves, and they're in consciousness and conscious in a different kind of, quite a different kind of way. And so the question from the point of view of somebody like myself, a futurist, would be, how do you get a big picture of what that might look like? How do you kind of reach out into this space where nobody's ever been before, that by definition has an extraordinarily different kind of character to it, nothing like in the past, and start to get your arms around that in some kind of way that you can start to anticipate and see what might be coming downstream. And our guest today, Jim McCarty, is part of an extraordinary kind of group that has been able to get that big picture, to give us an extraordinary, unusual kind of big perspective. And necessarily, because it's into this space where nobody's ever been before you, what the source for these kinds of perspectives turns out to be unconventional, right? And there have been a number over the last 50 years or so, a number of kind of non-human sources that have come forward with this integrated kind of picture of who humans are, where they came from, where they're going, how this kind of transition is going, and so on. Many people are familiar with the Seth books from Jane Roberts and this kind of integrated big picture that came over a whole series of these kind of channelings, these communications over a period of time. And similarly, in the early 80s, a group came together, a small group of just 3 people, including Jim McCarty. And they had, through 20 years or so, and he'll tell us a little bit about it, had made contact with an entity called Ra, R-A, Ra. And Ra said that it was an integrated group of a lot of things, and again, we'll let Jim tell us about it, because this stuff is non-standard and it kind of doesn't work in conventional ways. But the interesting thing was that Jim and his group had the opportunity over about 3.5 years to have 106 sessions, about hour-long ones or something like that, to where they could ask Ra anything about anything. About how humanity emerged, how the planet emerged, how the whole structure operated, what's the nature of God, where are we going, all of those kinds of things. And the one of the many interesting aspects of this series of interviews was a deep kind of understanding, or a new kind of understanding, of the underlying kind of structure of this kind of transition we're in right now, and where humanity is going, and how the mechanics of it all works. Now, Jim and his associates wrote 5 books so far, called The Law of One, Ra, The Law of One. And these have become rather famous books of late, influenced in part by David Wilcock, who is a well-known person in the New Agey kind of area. And David has spent a good bit of time studying these books and given a great deal of kind of exposure to them. And so there are 5 books now, and they're working on a 6th one. And I'm just very pleased to have with us today Jim McCarty, who's with us today. Jim, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Tell us a little bit about how this all got going, and you and your associates, and how it all kind of came together.
Well, it goes back to 1961 when Don first started investigating the possibility of getting
This is Don Elkins.
Don Elkins was the questioner for
Right.
the Raw Contact, and he had started back in 1961 getting information from a group in Detroit that was channeled information. It came from a fellow who had a face-to-face encounter with a supposed extraterrestrial entity. And back in the 50s, there was a phenomenon called the lingering telepathic contact that seemed to be a feature of having these types of encounters. And this happened for Walt Rogers. He was the guy who headed the group in Detroit. So he had a contact with this entity that supposedly was a planetary entity, or a group mind. And its name was Hatan. So Hatan transferred some information about how anybody could start a group of meditators and be able to receive this kind of information. So Don tried it out and discovered that it worked. And he had met Carla Rueckert at that time. He invited a dozen of his students from the physics class at the University of Louisville to be part of this experiment. And one of them brought his girlfriend along, who was Carla Rueckert. So she would eventually become the raw contact instrument, or the channel. So it took about 4 or 5 years for Don and Carla to really get together. And when they got together in 1968, they continued this work, and she learned how to channel. And I discovered them by hearing them give an interview on a radio station in central Kentucky, where I was living at the time. So when they talked about the philosophy of the extraterrestrial entities, I was very interested. They weren't talking about what a lot of people talk about, well, what did the ship look like? What was the landing traces? They were talking about the philosophy, and that the one infinite creator had made all this universe, all of us, and that we were all part of the same creator. So that kind of a concept was something I'd never heard of before. I had been interested in consciousness expansion, but I hadn't heard of the concept that there was one creator that made everybody and everything, and it was indwelling in all of its creation. So I was fortunate enough to meet them about 6 or so months later, when I found some folks in my area who were members of their meditation group in Louisville. So I began driving up there, and for a year, went to their channeling meditations, and they invited me to join them. We got along great. I helped them move to a new location, and they invited me to join them in the fall of 1980, and I joined them in December.
Now, Don Elkins was a PhD physicist?
He didn't have a PhD. He had a bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering.
Oh, mechanical engineering, but he was teaching physics.
He was teaching physics at U of L, Intro to Physics for the freshmen.
And then he turned out to be an airline pilot. So I mean, he was a commercial pilot.
Right.
So this is a guy who understood science and mechanics, and so it's not just kind of a woo-woo kind of folks, but I mean, he had his feet on the ground.
Right. He started in the hard sciences trying to figure out the nature of reality. He would not, as a kid in high school and so forth, he had this inquisitive mind. He wanted to know, well, how big was the universe? Who made it? How does it work? So at that time, all he could really do was to go to take the biology, physics, chemistry, and so forth. But as he got older and was graduated from U of L and started teaching, it was clear to him that the answers he was seeking really weren't in hard sciences.
Right.
He needed to get into another area, so he began investigating the paranormal area, and that provided more information for him.
And then Carla became the principal, as they call it in the books, the instrument for Ra that was kind of speaking through her, and what was kind of the mechanics of how that worked?
Well, it was unusual as far as we could tell. She had learned how to channel by doing the normal conscious channeling. She was aware that she was sitting in a chair and that she was speaking words that she was aware of in her mind. And she could have stopped that process at any time if she had wanted to. But when the raw contact started, it was totally different. It wasn't expected, and we weren't trying to do it. It just happened when Don and Carla were teaching another student how to channel. Yeah. She all of a sudden went into a trance and left her body. We never knew how she left her body. It was a mystery to us, a mystery to her.
Or where she went. Yeah.
Or where she, well, Ross said that they actually had her spirit with them.
Oh, okay.
And they weren't indwelling in her body like Seth was indwelling in Jane Roberts' body, using the body and speaking with it. They were using her body from what they said was the inner planes of the earth.
Yeah.
So they had hardly any real use of her body except for her vocal cords and her mouth and her lips and the tongue and so forth.
So how did they describe themselves, and why were they doing this?
Well, they said that they were a group consciousness, that there were 6.5 million of them, that they had gone through the same process we're going through here on Earth, and they had become able to become a planetary mind. They were from apparently the planet of Venus. And they had been successful in being able to go through the third density. They call the densities of experience according to light, the densities of light in there. So we have a certain amount of light in our third density. We're moving into a fourth density that has more light.
And this is the evolutionary process of human beings,
right?
You're talking about.
So they were here to help us with that process because apparently we're having difficulty with it. And when people like we are here on Earth have difficulty, we express the disharmonies that you can see in the news every day. That when we're unable to learn how to love and accept ourselves and others, then we have wars, we have a lot of problems with getting along with each other.
Right.
We haven't learned how to play together well. So that in itself is a kind of a call for assistance. So those of Ra are aware of such a call, that there are entities who wish to do better, to try to harmonize their vibrations, to raise their vibrations, to be more inclusive in their ability to see the environment around them as part of themselves and something that they're responsible for. So they have tried for a great deal of time to help people on Earth.
So essentially humans are going through this evolutionary process, and when individuals in particular get to places where they feel that they need somehow praying or reaching out or whatever it is for some way to kind of work their way to past the whatever problem that's in their way or on their way to the next thing, that prayer almost, if you will, is answered in part by these kinds of folks?
That's right. Sometimes it is actually prayer. And sometimes it's conversations like we're having here, that people are trying to figure out what's going on in the world. Why aren't things working the way it feels like they should be working? So it can be a lot of different ways of people putting out a call and of wishing for some assistance with what they feel intuitively and intellectually is their purpose in life and their destiny. They want to do better than they're doing, and they need help.
Yeah. So this is really quite encouraging, because what it essentially says is for those who want to kind of evolve or move forward or rise to a new level of consciousness, that there's help, and that help comes to help push us along or help us along.
That's right. It seems like those entities that have gone further than we are, they're traveling the same path, but they're a little further along than we are. the way they continue on that path is to come back and to help
Kind
others
of like
like
mentoring or something.
Right. That helps them too.
Yeah.
By them helping us, they also help themselves continue along the path, because it's all looking at each other as being the same, as being the creator, as being the same as yourself. And so they're just brothers and sisters helping brothers and sisters,
Sure.
basically.
So was there any particular reason other than that the three of you kind of reached out? Was there any particular reason that Ra came to you? Was it anything related to this period of time or anything?
Oh, it's definitely related to this period of time. They had two basic reasons, and the most important was that Earth is at the point now that it's going through what we call a transition or a transformation, so that there is an evolutionary leap in consciousness that is being made right now by individuals, but it is possible to make it as a group as well. So they're here to help with this, because at a time like this on Earth, when we're having difficulty realizing what's going on as a culture and as a society and as planetary consciousness, then this difficulty results in a kind of a call. The second reason is that for a long time they have been wanting to correct some distortions or misapprehensions of what they say is the law of one. And the law of one simply says we are all part of the same being. We are all part of the Creator. So 11,000 years ago or so, they apparently walked among the Egyptians to teach the law of one in person. But the Egyptians had a hard time perceiving Ra as being their brothers and sisters. Apparently there was something about them, they started to worship them as gods. And this was distressing to those of Ra, because they were not gods. They were brothers and sisters who wanted to help out the Egyptians. So they had to cut their visit short with the Egyptians and try to figure out how to correct the distortions in the law of one that came about by them being worshipped as gods, because they were not gods delivering an edict. They were brothers and sisters saying, we are all one, we're together, we're here to help you. So they had two reasons. The most important, though, was the Earth itself going through this transition.
So give us a little bit of background. How did they explain what kind of the human experience or the evolutionary experience had been historically, and how that we came to this point in time?
Well, they said Earth is kind of a unique case. Most planets, such as Earth, are able to go through this evolutionary process over a 75,000 year period. They call that
How many planets are there?
They say there are an infinite number of planets, that there is no counting, that the one infinite creator made an infinity of planets, and that all of them at some point go through this stage of evolution.
Wow.
That there's more waiting for us, there's an evolutionary track behind us as well.
Yeah.
So they said that planet Earth has become a repository, you might say, for a number of other entities from other third density planets that did not make...
What's third density?
Well, they say there's an octave of densities of light ascending, that each density has more light in it, more information in it.
So, octave kind of.
Right, just like the do, re, mi, fa,
Yeah,
sol,
right.
la, ti, do, with do being one octave higher than the beginning.
And what they say is that everything is light to start with,
Right.
and that as this light increases in, people talk about frequency kind of, right?
Right.
Then you have these, and we're up at the third level, is that right?
Right, they say the first level is the very basic level of they say the basic elements, earth, wind, fire, and water. That the fire and air are active elements. That they teach earth and water to be formed in such a manner that when the light of the sun interacts, that there's a possibility of life to spring forth.
Wow.
So at some point within the first density, this has a very simple awareness that there is this first single-cell creature, the polymorphous dinoflagellate, they call it, that then can evolve into the second density, where this simple awareness expands into plants and animals that have something approaching self-consciousness. And then after a great period of time, they can evolve into the third density, where we are, where they are complete beings, and we are complete beings of mind, body, and spirit, with very well-defined self-consciousness. So there is a time of 75,000 years that we have to make a transition into the fourth density. But now a lot of other planets have had this transition where their population was unable to make it. And so they've come to Earth to try again. You can try as many times as you need. There is no limit. You don't go to hell, there's no hell. You go back to Earth or another type of Earth, and you try again. So our population seems to be composed of a number of sources. Ross said there were 13 minor sources of planets, 3 major sources that compose the entire population of planet Earth. That's why we're so diverse. And perhaps one of the reasons that we've had such difficulty in coming together as a unified consciousness, because we are so different. It's been a problem that we have not yet solved. We've had thousands of years of wars and disharmony, and which is just the opposite of being able to come together into a unified consciousness, point the needle of the compass in one direction, and continue on, as Ra was able to do on Venus.
When you say that there are 3 different groups that kind of were contributing to the formation of humanity as we understand it, would that be anything like Asians and Africans and Europeans, or was there any indication that there were physical identifications presently that we could look back to and see?
Well, that's possible, but they didn't emphasize the physical nature, the color of the skin, or anything like that. They said it's probably more accurate to look at how a certain culture or people views the individual, how they see the individual fitting into the larger culture. Is it an autonomous individual with self?
So it's a mind, it's an orientation.
Right. It's a way of looking at people, at human beings, and how they relate to each other as individuals and the individual to the group. So I haven't tried to do that myself to figure out who's who.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, it's obvious we have a lot of different ways of looking at human beings and individuals on the planet.
And it's really quite clear that you have people at different levels now throughout the planet in every culture from every place. I mean, I gave a speech at Shanghai once, and there was a room full of Buddhists, and I couldn't believe that there are all these sweet, wonderful folks. And I said, how in the world can you do this in a communist country? And they said, they can't teach us they can't tell us how to think, you know.
Right.
And I was kind of rather amazed at what I found at the kind of different, what I found different places around the world. So tell us a little, start to tell us, we've got about 5 minutes here before then we'll go do a second segment, but tell us a little bit about the emergence, or this process, this of kind of transition from one era to another one.
Well, each 25,000 year cycle that makes up the 75,000 years has increasing opportunities for people to learn lessons. As we go along on our process of, we would call spiritual evolution, of expanding our awareness, there are opportunities that are provided for us to learn in a more rapid fashion, shall we say. So entities have, it's sort of like astrological descriptions of how the stars affect us, of how the moon affects us, and so forth, that there is a time for cosmic forces to come to the planet to generate increases in intelligence, in exploration, in curiosity, and so forth. So people have chances throughout all of the 75,000 year period of time to learn more about the nature of reality, about themselves, about how we're all related to each other. Because in this particular illusion, and it is an illusion because we have what is called the veil of forgetting that separates our conscious from our subconscious mind. And here on this Earth and other third density planets, we have this veil that makes it hard for us to see the entire picture. We can't see the whole picture. But that helps us in one regard because it makes us work harder while we're here to use our will to persevere in seeking what we have faith that actually exists, that there is a reason for being here, that it includes the concept of love, of understanding, of compassion, of being of service to others, and of creating our consciousness to be biased in a certain way, just like a car battery, that if we can get this power to want to be of service to others and to share our love with others, then we grow more quickly in a spiritual sense.
And so this is all based upon the concept, of course, of reincarnation.
Right.
That says that we as components of the larger one come back and have increasing kind of experiences on this planet which contribute to the, what would you call it, the awareness of the Creator.
Right. We have times in between our incarnations where we can look back on what we've done in previous incarnations and figure out, well, where did I do what I wanted to do, and where did I fall short? Where is there a place that I can do better, or increase my knowledge, or increase my ability to love and express this as compassion to others? So we can choose our lessons and program, you might say, the next incarnation. And our subconscious mind is aware of these programmings and kind of puts a little bias on the way we see things happening in our life. So we'll look at a certain kind of situation in a way that gives us the opportunity to learn what we want to learn.
Good. Well, what I want to do in the second segment is come back and talk specifically about that kind of process from a personal point of view, and then from a large kind of transitional point of view for the species. And that'll be another interesting conversation. And thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And we hope that you'll come back and join us in the second segment of this Postscript interview with Jim McCarty from the Law of One and Ra series. And we'll be back and we will talk about the details and the process by which the personal kind of transition happens and the kind of opportunities that we have to rise to the occasion to this new world. So thanks for being with us. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute. This is Postscript. We come to you from Berkeley Springs in West Virginia. And you can find out more about our series and our meetings here, our presentations, at transitiontalks.org. Thanks so much.